The boardroom went silent except for Dad's condescending chuckle echoing off the mahogany walls. I'd known this moment would come eventually. 3 years of building my investment portfolio in complete secrecy, 3 years of watching my parents dismiss every opinion I offered about their struggling tech manufacturing company, 3 years of sweetie, let the adults handle business talk at every family dinner. But I hadn't expected the confrontation to happen quite like this. My parents, Richard and Patricia Chin, had built Chin Technologies from a garage startup 25 years ago. They manufactured specialized circuit boards for aerospace applications, and for 2 decades they dominated their niche. But the last 5 years had been brutal. Competition from overseas, failure to innovate, and frankly, some catastrophically poor financial decisions had left them hemorrhaging money. I was their only child, their daughter Emma, who'd majored in something useless, according to them, computational finance and applied mathematics at MIT. After graduation, I'd taken a position at what Mom called my little job, at a boutique investment firm in Boston. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just an analyst. I was a partner. And I'd spent the last 3 years making extremely calculated investment decisions that had grown my personal portfolio from my signing bonus and early stock options into something substantial. Very substantial. The emergency board meeting had been called because Chin Technologies was circling the drain. They'd burned through their credit lines, alienated 2 major clients with delayed deliveries, and were facing a potential bankruptcy filing within 60 days. The board had been meeting for 2 hours before I arrived, and I'd deliberately come in late, slipping into a seat at the back of the room. Mom had spotted me immediately. "Emma, what are you doing here? This is a board meeting." "I was invited," I said quietly, keeping my voice level. Dad had actually laughed. "Invited? Honey, this is serious business. We're discussing the future of the company." "I understand that. Do you?" Mom's tone was sharp. "Because we're talking about complex financial restructuring, debt-to-equity swaps, and convertible notes. This isn't something you can Google." I'd opened my laptop saying nothing. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Most of them knew why I was there. The chairman had insisted on my attendance, but my parents were clearly in the dark. Marcus Webb, their CFO, had tried to redirect. "Richard, Patricia, perhaps we should continue with the agenda. We need to discuss the refinancing proposals." "In a minute," Dad said, still focused on me. "Emma, sweetheart, I appreciate that you're trying to be supportive, but this really isn't appropriate. These are confidential discussions about the company's financial situation." "I'm aware of the financial situation," I replied calmly. "Revenue down 42% over 3 years. Operating losses of $18 million last quarter alone. Current burn rate gives you maybe 8 weeks of runway." The room went completely still. Mom's face flushed. "Where did you hear those numbers?" "The preliminary financial reports. I reviewed them last week." "Those reports are confidential," Dad snapped. "Who leaked them to you?" Thomas Harrison, the board chairman and one of the original angel investors, cleared his throat. "Richard, Patricia, I think we need to—" "No, this is completely inappropriate," Mom interrupted. "Emma, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave. Now." I didn't move. "I'm a voting member of this board. I have every right to be here." Dad actually laughed again, that same condescending sound that I'd heard my entire life whenever I tried to discuss business with them. "A voting member? Emma, you don't own any shares in Chin Technologies. You're not on the board. I don't know who told you that you could just walk into a board meeting." "She owns 47% of the company," Thomas said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite detonated yet. Mom turned slowly to face Thomas. "What did you just say?" "Emma owns 47% of Chin Technologies. She's been accumulating shares for the past 14 months. She's our largest single shareholder and has been for 6 months." I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then anger. "That's impossible. The shares are closely held. We'd have to approve any transfer." "The shares she purchased were from the employee stock option pool and from 3 board members who sold their positions," Thomas explained. "All legitimate, arm's-length transactions. All properly documented with the SEC." "This is ridiculous," Mom said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Emma doesn't have that kind of money. Do you know what 47% of this company is worth?" "Based on your last valuation, approximately $440 million, I said quietly. Though honestly, that valuation was generous. Based on current performance, I'd estimate the real value at closer to $320 million. Which means I overpaid by about $120 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was staring at his laptop screen, fingers flying over the keys. By God. He's right. The filings are all here. How did I miss this? Because the purchases were made through 3 different LLCs, I explained. All properly disclosed, but you'd have to do some digging to connect them all to me. Dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is some kind of joke. Emma, what game are you playing? No game, Dad. I'm an investor. And frankly, I'm a concerned one. This company is in serious trouble. She can't even read a balance sheet, Dad said, turning to the board members as if appealing to them for sanity. His voice was rising now, losing its professional veneer. She's 28 years old. She works as some kind of junior analyst. She's a managing partner at Quantum Capital, Thomas interrupted. She's been running their tech portfolio for 2 years. Her fund returned 43% last year. Mom's face had gone pale. That's not possible. We'd have known. You would have told us. Why? I asked simply. So you could dismiss it like you've dismissed everything else I've ever done? Tell me how I don't understand the real world. Explain to me that my little job isn't real business. Don't take that tone with us, Mom snapped, but there was something desperate in her voice now. Then don't dismiss me in a board meeting, I replied, keeping my voice level. I'm here as an investor. A majority investor actually, since I closed a purchase agreement this morning for an additional 8% from Daniel Rothstein. I nodded at one of the board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable. That brings me to 55%. Majority shareholder. The room erupted. 3 board members started talking at once. Marcus was frantically typing. Mom and Dad just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Thomas banged his gavel. Order. Please. Let's everybody calm down and address this rationally. There's nothing rational about this, Dad said. His voice was quieter now, but harder. If this is true, and I'm not saying I believe it yet, but if it's true, then what? What exactly do you think you're going to do, Emma? Swoop in and save the company with your vast business experience. I'm going to vote to approve the restructuring plan Thomas proposed, I said. The one you were about to reject. Mom turned to Thomas. What restructuring plan? Thomas slid a document across the table. Quantum Capital, through one of its funds, has offered a $200 million investment. It would give Chin Technologies the capital to retool the manufacturing line, invest in the R&D you've been cutting, and hire the senior management you desperately need. In exchange, they'd take a convertible note that would allow them to increase their equity position to 65% if certain performance milestones aren't met. Absolutely not, Dad said immediately. We're not diluting ourselves into minority shareholders of our own company. You already are minority shareholders, I pointed out. I own 55% as of this morning. This is corporate raiding, Mom said, her voice shaking with fury. You're trying to steal the company we built. I'm trying to save it, I corrected. If you file for bankruptcy, you'll lose everything. The company will be liquidated, the brand will be sold for parts, and the 240 employees will lose their jobs. This way the company survives, grows, and everybody keeps their jobs. Under your control, Dad said bitterly. Under professional management, I corrected. I'm voting to retain Thomas as chairman. I'm voting to bring in Catherine Walsh from Innovatech as CEO. And I'm voting to create a new executive committee that will actually hold leadership accountable to the board. And what about us? Mom asked quietly. I met her eyes. You'll remain on the board. You'll keep your salaries reduced to market rate. And you'll have the satisfaction of watching the company you built continue to exist instead of being dismantled in bankruptcy court. This is insane, Dad said. He was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. You're 28 years old. You've been working for 5 years? And you expect us to believe you have $440 million to invest in a struggling manufacturing company. I had $620 million under management as of last quarter, I said calmly. Personally, that doesn't count the $4.2 billion in the funds I manage for Quantum. The Chin Technologies investment represents about 70% of my personal portfolio. It's a significant bet, yes. But I've run the models. With proper management and the right capital investment, this company can be worth $2 billion in 5 years. Marcus was nodding slowly. The models are actually conservative. If we can lock down the SpaceX contract she's referring to in her analysis. What SpaceX contract? Mom interrupted. The one I've been negotiating for the last 4 months, I said. They need a specialized circuit board manufacturer for their next-generation Starlink satellites. Chin Technologies has the perfect capabilities, but you don't have the capital to handle the order volume. With Quantum's investment, you'd be able to expand production enough to handle it. It's a $340 million contract over 3 years with options for renewal. The room had gone completely silent again. Dad had stopped pacing. Mom was gripping the edge of the table. Why? Mom finally asked. If you have all this money, all this success, why invest in us? You could have let us fail. You could have bought the assets in bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. Because despite everything, it's still the company you built, I said quietly. Because 240 people depend on these jobs. Because the technology is actually good, the brand has value, and the market opportunity is real. And because I wanted to prove that I could do it. Prove what? Dad asked. That I understand business, I said simply. The words hung in the air. I watched my father's face flush, watched my mother look away. Thomas cleared his throat. I think we should take a 15-minute recess. Let everybody process this information. Then we can reconvene and vote on the restructuring proposal. The board members filed out, most of them avoiding eye contact with my parents. Marcus left his laptop open, the SEC filings still displayed on the screen. Thomas paused at the door. Emma, could I speak with you outside? I nodded and followed him into the hallway, leaving my parents alone in the boardroom. That was brutal, Thomas said quietly once we were out of earshot. It was necessary, I replied. You could have told them privately. Before the meeting. I tried. 3 months ago. I called Dad and told him I wanted to discuss the company's financial situation. He told me I should focus on my career and let him worry about the business. I shook my head. They weren't going to listen unless they had no choice. Thomas nodded slowly. The restructuring plan is solid. Catherine Walsh is an excellent choice for CEO. But you know this is going to destroy your relationship with your parents. What relationship? I asked. The one where they dismiss everything I say? Where every achievement is diminished because it doesn't match their definition of success. Where I'm still treated like a child who doesn't understand how the world works. They're proud of what they built, Thomas said. This company has been their entire life. I know. And I'm trying to make sure it survives. But they have to understand that their way isn't working anymore. The market has changed. The technology has changed. They needed to evolve and they refused. And now you're forcing their hand. Yes. Thomas studied me for a long moment. You know, when you first approached me about buying my shares, I almost said no. I thought you were too young, too inexperienced. But then I looked at your track record. Looked at the companies you'd invested in, the returns you'd generated. You have an instinct for this that most people spend decades developing. My parents taught me everything about manufacturing, I said. They just didn't realize they were also teaching me how to spot inefficiencies, how to analyze markets, how to evaluate risk. I just applied those lessons to finance instead of circuit boards. Ironic, isn't it? Extremely. We stood in silence for a moment, watching through the boardroom windows as my parents sat at opposite ends of the long table, not speaking to each other. They're going to fight this, Thomas warned. They're going to look for any legal angle to block the restructuring. I know. That's why I made sure every filing was perfect. Every transaction was arm's length. Every disclosure was timely. They can hire the best lawyers in the world and they won't find anything improper. You've been planning this for a long time. 14 months, I confirmed. Since the first time I saw the quarterly financials and realized how bad things had gotten. Thomas shook his head slowly. Your parents are brilliant engineers. They built revolutionary technology. But they're terrible managers and they're even worse at admitting when they need help. That's why the restructuring plan puts real operators in charge. People who know how to scale a manufacturing business, how to manage supply chains, how to handle growth. My parents can focus on what they're actually good at, engineering and product development, just not running the day-to-day operations. Think they'll accept that? They don't have a choice. I control 55% of the shares. I can outvote them on any decision. That's not what I asked. I sighed. No, probably not. At least not at first. But eventually when the company stabilizes and starts growing again, maybe they'll understand. And if they don't? Then at least 240 people keep their jobs and a good company doesn't die because of ego and stubbornness. The 15 minutes stretched to 20, then 25. Finally, Thomas suggested we reconvene. The board members filed back in, taking their seats around the table. My parents were the last to enter, and they sat together at one end, presenting a united front. Thomas called the meeting to order. We have a proposal on the table for a $200 million investment from Quantum Capital in exchange for convertible notes and board restructuring. I'd like to open the floor for discussion before we vote. I have something to say, Dad announced, standing up. He'd regained some of his composure, and his voice had that formal quality it took on when he was making what he considered an important speech. What Emma has done here today is legal, perhaps, but it's not ethical. She's used her position, her knowledge of our vulnerabilities, to orchestrate a hostile takeover of the company her mother and I spent 25 years building. Dad, I started, but he held up a hand. I'm not finished. You sat in our home, ate at our table, and said nothing while you were secretly buying up shares in our company. You positioned yourself to swoop in when we were most vulnerable and seize control. And now you want us to simply accept that we're minority shareholders in our own company? That we should step aside and let some outsider CEO take over. Catherine Walsh isn't an outsider, I said calmly. She's one of the most respected operators in the industry. She took Innovatech from $50 million in revenue to $800 million in 7 years. She's not us, Mom said. She doesn't understand our culture, our values, what we've built here. With respect, Marcus interjected quietly, our culture and values won't matter if the company goes bankrupt in 2 months. Mom turned on him. And whose side are you on, Marcus? I'm on the side of the 240 employees who depend on their paychecks, Marcus said steadily. I'm on the side of the pension fund that covers their retirement. I'm on the side of keeping this company alive. And Emma's plan is the only viable option on the table. That's not true, Dad argued. We have other offers. We could. You have one other offer, Thomas interrupted. From Davidson Industrial. They're offering $120 million for the assets in bankruptcy. They'll keep maybe 30 employees to handle the transition, then shut down the facility and move production to their plant in Malaysia. Everyone else loses their job. There have to be other options, Mom insisted. There aren't, I said quietly. I've spent 4 months looking. I've talked to every strategic buyer, every private equity firm, every investment bank that might have an interest. The market for specialized circuit board manufacturers is brutal right now. You're competing against companies with lower costs, better technology, and deeper pockets. The only reason Quantum is willing to invest is because I'm willing to bet my personal capital on the turnaround, and because I've already secured the SpaceX contract contingent on this restructuring. You should have come to us, Dad said, and for the first time his voice cracked slightly. You should have told us what you were planning. I tried to tell you 3 months ago that the company was in trouble. You told me I didn't understand business. That was different. How? I asked. How was it different? I tried to offer advice, tried to point out the problems I was seeing, and you dismissed me. Just like you've dismissed me my entire life whenever I tried to talk about business or finance or strategy. That's not fair, Mom said. Isn't it? I looked at her directly. How many times have you told me my degree was impractical? How many times have you called my job cute, or sweet? How many dinners have you told me to leave the business talk to people who understand it? The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken resentment. I didn't want it to be like this, I said finally. I wanted to help. I wanted to use what I've learned, what I've built to save the company you created. But you couldn't see me as anything other than your daughter who doesn't understand the real world. You're 28 years old, Dad said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I'm 28 years old with $620 million under management and a track record of successful investments in 17 different companies, I replied. I'm 28 years old who saw the SpaceX opportunity you missed. I'm 28 years old who put together a restructuring plan that will save 240 jobs. At what point do I stop being too young and start being someone you listen to? No one had an answer to that. Thomas cleared his throat. I think we should vote. All in favor of accepting the Quantum Capital restructuring proposal. I raised my hand immediately. Thomas raised his. Marcus. 3 other board members. 6 out of 11. All opposed. My parents raised their hands. Two other board members, old colleagues of theirs, joined them. 4 votes against. The motion carries, Thomas announced. The restructuring is approved. Dad stood up abruptly. We'll challenge this. We'll find a lawyer who can prove that Emma manipulated the situation, used insider information. Every trade was logged and disclosed, Marcus said quietly. I've reviewed every transaction. They're all clean. You can hire every lawyer in New York, Richard. It won't change anything. Mom was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hurt, anger, something else. There's one more item on the agenda, Thomas said. Emma has requested to address the full company staff tomorrow at 10 a.m. She wants to explain the restructuring and answer questions. I think that's appropriate, given her position as majority shareholder. Absolutely not, Dad said. Those are our employees. They're the company's employees, I corrected gently. And they deserve to hear what's happening from someone who can actually answer their questions about job security and the future. This is wrong, Mom said quietly. She stood up, gathering her things. What you've done here today, Emma. It's not just about business. You've destroyed your family over money and control. I've saved your company, I replied. Whether you can see that or not. My parents left without another word. The other board members filed out more slowly, some stopping to shake my hand or murmur congratulations, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Finally, it was just Thomas, Marcus, and me in the boardroom. Well, Marcus said, that was the most dramatic board meeting I've attended in 35 years of corporate finance. It had to be done, Thomas said. Richard and Patricia would have driven this company into the ground rather than admit they needed help. Will they recover from this? Marcus asked. As people, I mean. Not as executives. I thought about that question. I don't know. Maybe eventually. Or maybe they'll never forgive me for proving them wrong. For what it's worth, Thomas said, you did the right thing. Not the easy thing but the right thing. I closed my laptop, gathering my materials. I should prepare for tomorrow's meeting. The employees are going to have a lot of questions. Emma, Marcus said as I reached the door. That SpaceX contract. Is it really solid? I smiled slightly. Verbal commitment from their VP of supply chain. Contract language being finalized by their legal team. Should have signatures within 3 weeks. Why? Because if you pull that off, this company doesn't just survive. Thrives. You'll have transformed it from a failing manufacturer into a key supplier for the biggest space company in the world. That's the plan, I said. My parents taught me to think big. They just didn't expect me to think bigger than they did. I left the building as the sun was setting over the parking lot. My phone buzzed with messages. My team at Quantum Capital wanted updates. Catherine Walsh wanted to discuss transition planning. My lawyer wanted to confirm the restructuring documents were properly filed. But there was nothing from my parents. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the Chin Technologies building. 25 years of my parents' work. 25 years of innovation, struggle, success, and ultimately failure to adapt. And now it was mine to fix. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas. Employee meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Conference room B. About 200 people will be there. Most are terrified. Be ready for tough questions. I typed back, I'm ready. And I was. I'd spent 14 months preparing for this moment, 4 months negotiating the SpaceX contract, countless hours analyzing every aspect of the business. I knew the company better than my parents did now. Every production line, every efficiency ratio, every cost center. What I wasn't prepared for was the hollow feeling in my chest when I thought about my mother's face as she'd left the boardroom. The way my father's voice had cracked when he'd asked why I hadn't come to them. But I tried to come to them. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. Every attempt had been met with dismissal, with condescension, with the same tired refrain that I didn't understand business. Well, now they knew I understood business. The question was whether they'd ever understand why I'd done it. I started my car and drove away from Chin Technologies, away from the building that represented my parents' entire lives, the company that was now majority controlled by their daughter who couldn't even read a balance sheet. Tomorrow I'd stand in front of 200 scared employees and explain how we were going to save their jobs. I'd outline the restructuring plan, announce the SpaceX contract, introduce Catherine Walsh as their new CEO. And somewhere in the back of the room my parents would be watching. Watching their daughter, the one who didn't understand business, who worked a little job, who needed to let the adults handle important things, explain how she'd saved everything they'd built. Whether they'd thank me or hate me for it remained to be seen. But the company would survive. The jobs would be saved. And that had to be enough. Even if it meant my parents might never speak to me again.